What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is David Ramsdenwood here for another episode of the Hot Take of the Day podcast. And today, I am very fortunate to be joined by Ron Gusek of Liberty Oilfield Services. He is the president there, and we have a lot to talk about. Ron, welcome to the podcast. I haven't seen you since I think it was the DPC panel about 3 months ago. How have you been?
Doing very well, thanks. Doing very well. I was going to say crawfish boil was my best guess as the last time we crossed paths. So a little fun in there as well. But
it is. It's such a great industry, and it's great to see people able to get back out. And, you know, even since the last time I saw you 3 months ago, I think oil's probably moved in a relatively straight line from 60 to 73. Your chairman, Chris Wright, has been having some fun with the North Face. We're going to talk about that. And as always, you continue to advocate really strongly for both our industry, what we do for energy poverty, and really, I think Liberty's taken a leadership role on the ESG side as well. So I don't know which of those you want to start with, but just give us an update on how 2021's been going so far.
Sure. Gosh, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think all things considered, 2021's been going pretty well. Of course, we wrapped up the OneStim acquisition right at the end of the year, and so we embarked in the new year with a much bigger family here at Liberty than we had coming out of last year. That's been a ton of fun. You know, I won't say without a few challenges, of course, as all transactions of that scale are, but man, I couldn't be more excited about the people that have joined the Liberty organization and the things that we are going to accomplish together going forward. Team has done a huge amount of work, of course, to bring two organizations that big together and to get all those pieces of the puzzle plugged in, and so lots of work in the background going on in that world, of course. And ESG report was a huge thing for us this year. That was an undertaking we recognized we were going to have to do last year, and so we started work on it in 2020. And ultimately, it just grew and grew and grew as we recognized the conversation just needed to encompass more than we originally thought. You know, you start on a project like that with an idea based on the other ESG reports that are out there and kind of what they've done, but I think we quickly recognized that ours was going to have to look a little different than that. And you know, same sort of thought processes went into the North Face conversation and all those things. We just have to continue to drive towards a fact-based, realistic conversation that evaluates the trade-offs of any energy form that we choose to use. And so ultimately, the ESG report grew into an important part of that. So it was a huge undertaking. Chris, of course, deserves a huge amount of credit for the amount of work that went into that, but Audrey and Liz and the team in our marketing and communications world knocked that one out of the park. That is a fantastic document, and the feedback that we have gotten has been tremendously positive. So I'm glad we invested the effort.
So let's talk about ESG, because I think it's a great place to really start this conversation. You know, we talk about environmental, we talk about social, and we talk about governance, and there's lots of different elements to that. As you looked at gaps, we'll say industry, but also, you know, at Liberty, you said that you really felt like a lot of effort, more effort perhaps, had to go into the ESG report. Where did you feel that the gaps were, and how do you see the report? Because obviously the criticism of, you know, the ESG scorecard or the ESG sustainability reports that some companies put out is that, yeah, I mean, it's nice, but it's kind of a virtue signaling there.
Right.
Whereas, you know, you guys have always been a leader in Colorado as a Colorado headquartered company, but you've always been a leader in some of the sustainability and environmental pushes and seeing the cutting edge. So what was it that was the gap in the organization, and how do you see this report really helping crystallize where you're going?
Yeah, well, so if you break down the three letters there, you know, from a governance standpoint, and of course, you've always done a great job highlighting the challenges here, there has to be alignment in your organization. You have to make sure that the organization and the people who choose to invest in that organization are aligned in where they are going. And I think we've always been like that at Liberty. We built the organization that way. It's been a philosophy of ours since the get-go. So I don't think we felt we had a huge delta there in terms of where we believe the industry should be, and I think is reasonably migrating towards now. The social side, I've always thought very highly of our industry in this regard. The oil and gas community, I would argue, second to none in terms of the amount of work that that companies are out doing for great organizations across the country. And so I think there's always been a very, very compelling story there, maybe one we haven't shouted about as much as we should. And so I think it's important we continue to do that too. But I think when we really looked at where the gap was, it's around this environmental reporting thing. And I think, unfortunately, we have found ourselves in a position where the conversation that is happening in the public realm is one focused on only on one side of this. And unfortunately, it leads to, I guess, maybe to your point, a little bit of virtue signaling, some box checking to say that we're doing all these things to get a little bit better. But I think where we saw the real gap there was the fact that that conversation has been happening without consideration for the other side of the narrative. You know, the world consumes 100 million barrels a day, and yet we have conversations here in North America, and specifically here in Colorado, around just doing away with oil and gas. There's this perception out there that light switches will continue to work, that food will continue to get delivered, that manufacturing will continue to happen, and we could do so even if we turned off all of the wells tomorrow. And you know, I just think we found that there is a lack of appreciation for how much different life has become in just 150 or 200 years, with a dramatic change in our energy consumption and access to low cost, reliable energy that is easily transportable, easily storable, and readily available for us as we need. And so the ESG report for us ultimately became a platform in which to encourage a very candid conversation around that, to consider not only the side of the equation that recognizes the impacts that consuming oil and gas has, because of course there are some, we know that and understand that, but also the other side of the equation that considers all of the benefits that come with the access to that, and maybe even a little more importantly than that, the fact that we are having a conversation here, the decisions from which will impact billions of people who are yet to enjoy a lifestyle like we do. We're making decisions, having conversations, contemplating policy in a bubble that recognizes only the environment that North America and Europe and maybe a few other parts of the world find themselves in, without really consideration for the impacts of the other many billion people who don't have access to the lifestyle we enjoy today.
So one of the things I want to talk about, the energy poverty, because you do a really good job talking about it, and I believe at your ESG day you had, and I can't remember the author's name. It's a brand new book. I think it's called Undecided. Is it Steve Koonin?
Steve Koonin. So the book's called Unsettled. Yeah.
Unsettled. That's right. So I want to come back to that one and I will tie it with world energy poverty. But you're a big advocate for energy because, as you said, reliable forms. One of the things that struck me was when the state of New York shut down the Indian Point nuclear reactor, there's 2,000 megawatts of energy. And at least what I saw is the city of New York uses 13,000 megawatt hours. So you know, that facility roughly powers half the city, very easy, or the full city times two, and they shut it down. And I got in a discussion on LinkedIn by someone who I respect and weighs in with some really good opinions. And the point was, there's been a lot of leaks. And so my answer was, well, if you want a carbon-free world, nuclear comes with drawbacks. And if you want a carbon-free world, solar and wind come with drawbacks. If you want a high energy reliable world, oil and gas and fossil fuels and coal come with drawbacks. But what we seem to forget in the narrative is the trade-offs, which, you know, you talk a lot about, but as that ties to Steve Koonin and his book Unsettled with CO2 and climate change, I'm curious what your takeaways were for the employees and for those that heard that speech and who haven't read the book. I have it ordered and I'm going to be reading it this summer.
Yeah, I think the great thing about books like that, and of course I'm just so happy that folks like him are coming out and writing about what they view as the realities of our energy conversation. We're a little bit challenged being from an oil and gas background. Of course, anything that comes out of our mouth, it better be fact-based or it is automatically called into question. So it needs to be irrefutable. He has the advantage of coming from a little different platform. Of course, he was the Undersecretary of Science, I think is the right title, under the Obama administration. You know, here's a guy who was right in the middle of this conversation around climate change, deeply involved in understanding the trade-offs that were part of this, and well read on the IPCC documentation. And so, I think here's a person who knows what that conversation should entail, but sees a very, very different narrative playing out in the public space, and I think rightly so, frustrated that important parts of the conversation are being left out, and unfortunately, we are being pointed in a direction that I think only contemplates what are some of the very, very worst case scenarios, without recognition of the economic trade-offs and things like that need to be contemplated. And so I think he does a very nice job of spelling out in a data-packed book, well referenced and well supported, exactly what that story should be and what that narrative should be. And we need people who have that platform, that are willing to stand up and have that conversation, to challenge the whatever it might be, the policymakers, the educational institutions, any place that conversation is happening, to make sure that the conversation that does happen is an honest one that considers all of the facts and trade-offs. To your point, we should be about all of the above energy forms. We don't need to pick winners and losers necessarily, but that decision should be based on data and not emotion. And unfortunately today, I don't think that's the case. Him, by virtue of being a scientist and understanding the scientific method and what it means to be a scientist, is all about making those decisions the right way. You develop a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, ultimately come to a conclusion, but recognize that that's an evolving process, that science is never done. There's no such thing as the science. The science of climate change, as that conversation is happening, will continue to evolve. And we know that there's room for improvement there. We know the models don't accurately predict what our world looks like yet. And so we shouldn't presume to say that they do, and we should be prepared to accept and be open to the changes when we find out that we were wrong the last time.
I think that's the piece in the teaser that I read, at least, about the book. It was set up contextually that there was a debate between like the best scientific minds on both sides. And it was sort of like a really well thought out, like people were raising points and having conversations where, you never turn on CNN or Fox News and see a balanced, measured approach of two experts on other sides of the page. And it really, as I understand it, it really didn't put him in good stead and made him very unpopular, because he was pointing out that models can be wrong, and that the headlines, which obviously is the mass proliferation of the media, similar to the Imperial College model of deaths from COVID, they took a scenario which never would have played out and fanned it forward, and everyone took it as gospel. And climate change seems to be on that, and yet we don't want to have the conversation. So I commend you for having him come and setting the point, because if you guys don't have him come and talk, no one else is going to support it. So I think that's great. It backs with what Liberty does. It backs with your ESG. And I think that it's a great book that everyone should read. Now, it ties to modeling, and it's one of the second things I wanted to talk to you about. Liberty is known and really started as a frac company that was just so based in modeling and data and doing really excellent technical work. We've evolved the way we manage data. We've evolved how fast we can process. We've evolved the way we frac. Can you talk to us about the technology approach that Liberty takes for its customers, and why the fracs that you guys have are considered, if not the top in industry, certainly amongst the top, and make you such a great company?
Sure. Definitely a couple of areas I would delve into there. I can't remember who said this, but it's definitely attributable to somebody. You can't fix what you don't measure. And so if you're not about collecting data and understanding the problem, there's no way to get better at whatever it is that you're trying to solve. And so in our world, that takes two forms. First of all, the underground challenge. We're working in ever tighter reservoirs that require more and more advanced stimulation techniques, and we continue as an industry to find ways to get better and better at that, to get oil and gas out of places we wouldn't have thought possible maybe even a decade and a half ago. And so that's been a tremendous step forward for us. But even today, what's average recovery, primary recovery out of a tight oil reservoir? 10%, give or take a little bit. I mean, the prize is massive in front of us yet. And so if we recognize that there's a huge opportunity out there to continue to improve, of course, we have to collect data to better understand that. And we don't have the advantage of credit card transactions or something like that. There's more credit card transactions in a second than there probably are unconventional wells in North America today. And so when you think about the amount of data that an organization like Visa or MasterCard or somebody has to analyze spending patterns and ultimately make decisions, we don't have that luxury inside of our industry. So we have to make sure that the data we have is very, very good, that it's thoughtfully and methodically collected and scrubbed, and then that we make use of it in the best possible way to ensure that we don't end up down some bunny trail someplace. And so, for us, that started in the subsurface world from the day we started with an unconventional well database. That started in the Bakken, then grew to the DJ, now covers the United States and growing into Canada as well. So that database is 125, 130,000 wells big or something like that. That includes all of the publicly available data, all of the data that Liberty collects in the execution of the services that we provide in the field. And then from many of our customers, some amount of data from them that they are willing to add into that database to better enable us to do the work that we are doing for them. And so, while we like to talk about multivariate analysis, this whole big data idea, of course, we don't truly have big data just by virtue of the size of the portfolio of wells that we have. And so we have to constrain that. We have to, of course, we understand how fractures grow underground. We understand the physics that control the height and the length and how they propagate through rock to some degree. And so it's a combination of those that I think have ultimately enabled us to deliver a better solution to our customers. This idea that we can take this multivariate analysis and understand which variables contribute to a better outcome in a well. So think stage spacing, perforation design, amount of fluid we pump, the rate we pump it at, what chemistry is used, the type of sand and size of sand that we use. I mean, there's a long list of variables, and you could just dump all of that stuff into a multivariate analysis and goal seek to the best possible outcome. But that might not necessarily be grounded in reality. There is certainly a possible scenario where that's not something that's at all realistic. And so we add on top of that a layer of physical constraints that say, these things are beyond the realm of possibility for a realistic fracture growing underground. So that involves reservoir simulation and frac simulation and work like that. And together, that multivariate analysis and that physics constrained work around it, I think ultimately provide us the opportunity to work with customers on providing a pathway that, given the current economics, of course, this result changes depending on the price of oil, what the best possible completion we could put in the ground under that set of economic assumptions would be.
So we'll come back to oil and the change in activity level and how you managed through 2020, where activity was basically a standstill, and now oil $75, much to the surprise and maybe not even surprise. We've seen analysts talk about even 100 or 150, which seems far-fetched given that we were negative 37 only a little over a year ago. But I'm going to throw two stats by you that I learned recently. Number one is 99% of the data collected by organizations is not actually analyzed. And when I hear that, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Like, how could we be doing that? But then the second stat that ties is that 90% of the data in the world that exists today did not exist 2 years ago, or said another way, was created in the last 2 years. And that 90% of the data that will exist in the world in 2 years has yet to be created, which is to say we get these Internet of Things and sensors and data and LiDAR and video and iPhones, and everything creates this massive footprint, and we don't have the ability or the time yet to manage it. When you go back to the beginning of Liberty and your evolution of data, this 130,000 well database you have, the ability to analyze the data collection you do, what have you seen that's changed? And what are you seeing as challenges for our industry to actually be able to turn this data into knowledge?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think on the subsurface side, we've probably been a little bit better about that from the outset. I think we went into that project knowing exactly what we wanted to be able to do with that data. And so we've been very intentional about the exercise there. And that database hasn't changed in size as much as I loved your statistics. I think those are quite fascinating. as I think about the numbers you said there, I would probably pivot more to the equipment monitoring side of our world, and just think about how much data we are, as an industry, on the verge of collecting for engine performance, transmission performance, the performance of our pump, and how long components last. And, of course, there was 25 years ago when I started in the frac world, we didn't think about that at all. We only pumped a frac a day, and so pumps lasted a long, long time. But fast forward to today's world, where those assets are running 24 hours a day under ever more intense conditions, and now with simul-frac, twice as much equipment running on a location. Of course, our desire to collect and understand that data has moved dramatically. But yeah, I think you make a very, very good point. It's much, much easier to collect the data and pile it up in a giant database than it is to actually take that and translate it into something useful. And so, if you thought about how we put that data to use, if I thought back a couple of years, we have all kinds of mechanical challenges inside the pressure pumping world. That might be a problem on an engine or a transmission. And so we have these failures that we know happen and we've ultimately had to fix. But previously, we haven't collected the data leading up to that ultimately would have helped us to predict that. And so now, as we begin more and more data, ultimately we have to go through this learning process. We've got to go through some more failures, so to speak, to ultimately have that data be useful to us, to identify those signatures in that data that tell us what we should be doing differently, what we should be looking for, how we could use that to ultimately change operations in the field. And I guess you could ultimately make the same argument for subsurface, whether that's drilling data or whatever the case might be. It's easy to collect the data. It's entirely another thing to take that data, to use it to understand things have happened in the past that you probably could have fixed, and turn it into a system that represents a predictive sort of mechanism that could interject and either take action on your behalf, or at least provide you guidance on action that should be taken. And I think that's where the industry is today. I certainly think we are moving rapidly in that space, and there are a lot of great companies, partner organizations in that space that are helping to move the ball forward there. And I'm guessing in a couple of years' time, we'll have figured out all of this stuff, and we'll be making good use of the data we're collecting today, but we will have tools to collect a pile more data we haven't yet contemplated.
Absolutely. So 2020 was an interesting year, to say the least. And now, not only did you close a very large acquisition, the OneStim deal in late 2020, but you had to deal with a massive drop in activity levels. And obviously your industry is a very people intensive, equipment intensive, capital intensive one. How did you as a company and as people, I know that you care deeply about the employees, Liberty's always made a point of that. How did you manage it personally, and how do you feel like you were positioned coming out of the vaccine announcement, which basically the turnaround? You could couple the election and the vaccine announcement happened within sort of a week, and then it was like a V, and everything was just up and to the right. How did you guys manage 2020 and then position yourself to be able to execute during this upturn that we're currently seeing?
2020 was tough. I've worked together with the management team here for a long, long time. I've known Chris for almost 20 years now. And, if there's one thing that has always been a common thread through every business that Chris has been a part of, it has been the critical importance of the people that you bring together to make the business a success. We have going into 2020, there were 2,650 people working at Liberty, give or take a little bit. The family had grown a fair bit, but they were an organization, a group of people that delivered at the 95th percentile. I would argue our performance unrivaled in the industry, and that was a testament to the people who had come together in this organization to make Liberty what it was. And for the first time ever Chris has been an entrepreneur since 1992. So for the first time in 28 years, we found ourselves in a position where we had to make a decision around layoffs. That had never happened in our past together. And so that was incredibly difficult to find ourselves, in Q1 of 2020, things were going well. We had 24 frac crews out and running, and we're excited about the future. And then the rug got yanked out from, everybody. I mean, it wasn't just our industry that suffered. Of course, that it was felt across the board. But we found ourselves in the position of having to make a decision we'd never had to make before. But for the survival of the organization, in the interest of having a Liberty that was going to go forward, hard decisions had to be made. And so we did that in April and headed into May, and ultimately slimmed the organization down by about 50%. So we made a decision to staff down to only 12 frac crews from 24 running previously, and then ultimately furloughed below that. Liberty went through a period last year, a 1-week period, where we earned zero revenue as a service organization. And of course, to your point, we are people intensive. We have a lot of people, and we only earn revenue when frac crews are out in the field. And we went through a period of time last year where that was not true. And understandably so. I mean, businesses needed to be preserved. Organizations had to find a way out the other end of this, and hard decisions had to get made. And that involved a dramatic reduction in activity levels out in the field. We understand that. We get that. And as partners to our customers on the E&P side, we have to find a way to navigate through that together. So you certainly can't blame them for the decisions that had to get made last year. So we retrenched all the way back to that position. The end of May was the absolute low point, and then June got a little bit better, and July got a little bit better than that, and every month was just an incremental step forward. I would say that last year was a challenge. I would freely admit I'm an introvert. I'm very happy in front of a computer in the corner, being pretty quiet about things. And I don't know if that's natural for most engineers, but that's who I am. But oh my gosh, even I found it a very different world when there were not people out and about. And so, there aren't a lot of silver linings in last year, but being an oil and gas service company had some benefits in that we were an essential service. And so we maintained a minimum staff in our office. We closed completely for a short period of time, but ultimately had the office back open and kept some amount of staff here to keep things going day to day. Of course, there are a lot of people working hard from home, but for those people who wanted to be in the office and have that back and forth that has always been Liberty, we had that opportunity, and I was very grateful for that. So that was important to us. Liberty, I think we've prided ourselves on the culture that we have built. That's not a culture built over computer screens and through Zoom meetings and things like that. That's a culture built by bringing people together, not only to work hard together, but to play hard together. And that was taken away from us last year. But I think the reason Liberty was able to both, get through last year, but also complete the largest transaction I suspect we will ever complete as a business successfully. In the midst of that was the resilience, the tenacity, the stick togetherness that the team had built by virtue of being here together and bonding over the years of growth that we have enjoyed. And so, gosh, that day when we could have everybody back in the office could not come soon enough for me. I know the world's changing a little bit, and expectations around how people work are changing a little bit, but I still am a firm believer that we are who we are. We enjoy the success we have had, and we were able to get through last year and accomplish what we did because we are a cohesive team that has worked so closely together, wherever that might be, whether in a district or in a sales office or here in Denver.
So there's a lot of great threads there that I want to follow, but the work from home, I think, is one that is, now we're here, and I remember I had Chris Wright on the podcast about the time you announced the OneStim acquisition, and I had Vicki Hollop on the podcast during the summer when, and she had sort of alluded to the comments that, the work from home can kind of work for 9 months, but our industry, and I would say broadly, we're very collaborative, and there's something about going to lunch with your colleagues or traveling and being in the field together or having drinks after work or just bumping into someone at the water cooler, that connectivity, that culture is so important. And so what I'm hearing you say on the work from home, you went back as quick as you could for all intents and purposes. You see that the work from home obviously has a place at times, but broadly people are going to be in the office. And concurrent with that, you brought in an entire new organization. And so from a relative size, you said you were running 24 frac crews at the peak. What did the OneStim acquisition bring in terms of total units? And then how did you manage that integration and ramp up? Because I think you closed in December. Do I remember that correctly?
New Year's Eve, yep.
And so you had like 7 weeks of this just ramp up from oil at 35, just tick, 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 tick. Clearly customers are starting to think, well, maybe January, maybe February, you're integrating new people, you've laid off half the field staff before, you're balancing work from home. How did you pull that all together, and how big was this OneStim acquisition?
So the company roughly doubled in size, not quite, but from the position we had retrenched to, we basically ended up doubling up. So of course it added a meaningful number of frac crews. We're running north of 30 frac crews today, but it also added wireline, which we were very excited to have as part of our portfolio now, a service line we did not have. It added a couple of sand mines in Texas, so another new piece to our world. And then of course it added a handful of districts. We did not have a physical presence in the Haynesville, in the Mid-Con, in the Northeast, or in Canada. And now excited to be in each and every one of those places, especially Canada.
As a fellow Canadian, myself being dual, I think you are as well.
Yeah, so it has a special spot in my heart, that one. So I think fortunately, Schlumberger has been incredibly supportive through the whole thing. They have a vested interest in our success now, being a part owner of Liberty going forward, and so they worked hard to be very helpful through that whole period of time. Through the first couple of months, in fact, they continued to carry on back office support just to make sure that we didn't stub our toe right out of the gate. Sand showed up, chemicals showed up, people got paid, and all of those kinds of things. So there was that important behind the scenes piece that was going on just to help things, help make sure that all of that fundamental stuff got taken care of. But I think what was most important in this transaction, and again, it just comes down to being out in front of the people, was that we got out there as early as we could. So the day after we announced the transaction, we announced it right at the end of August last year. The leadership team from here got on a plane and we flew down to Midland, and we started from there, and we got in a vehicle together and we drove across Texas and we drove out into Louisiana, and ultimately our goal was to visit each and every one of the districts and to get in front of our team. Of course, we wanted them to understand what we were doing and how we were thinking about this, but each and every one of the OneStim employees that was going to become a part of the Liberty family going forward, so they could meet us, so they could ask questions, anything they wanted. But it was important for us to get out there and say hi to them, put a face to a name, and to give them as much comfort as we could about what was about to happen going forward, that we were all in on this together, that why we believed in this transaction and why we believed it was going to make us a great service company going forward. Because without the buy-in of the people out in the field, without those folks out at the tip of the spear who do what they do each and every day to make our company a success, without their support, there's no way this thing is a success out of the gate. And so it was our first priority to get out and do that, to meet those folks, to shake hands with them, to answer questions, and to let them know that we were here to stand by them through this whole thing. And I think with that buy-in, with that confidence there, then I think we have the support to make this thing a success. And as they transition from OneStim to Liberty Coveralls and start to work under a new name, that we have their commitment to go out and do the same thing they've been doing every day. And of course, they were a well-respected service organization. All we had to do was make sure that didn't change, to make sure that they had the same commitment going forward that they always had to deliver at the top level for our customers. And so we made that our priority, and I think successfully so. And as a result, when we got over that transition and into the new year, we had a team out there, both Liberty and OneStim all come together. They were all in the same boat, rowing in the same direction, not without a few hiccups, of course, there always are in a transaction this size, but in true Liberty spirit, they got through them all, and I think we're off in a great direction right now.
How helpful, I mean, I hate to call it helpful because obviously it impacted the lives of more than 50% of your Liberty employees. But then the ramp up happened as you were merging, and clearly Schlumberger would have gone through some level of similar layoffs. But as you were ramping up, you got these new employees, you got these new business units. Did it help to have space in the organization as the thing was growing, to be able to absorb people, and that people just kind of got back to work. And then second to that question, what tips would you give other companies? Because as you know, and I've written for a long time, we're in a consolidation phase of the industry, and that unfortunately comes with some job losses, but there are people who stay. What tip would you give other CEOs, other employees, other managers to successfully integrate an acquisition and with the retained people? You know, you talked about the field visits, but are there any other tips that you would give? And then how much did it help that you ramped up at the same time as you were bringing these people on?
Yeah, you know, of course, there aren't a lot of positive things you'd point out about last year, but you know, certainly one of the benefits of dropping to the level of activity that we did, and then ultimately that slow creep back out of that, was that it probably gave people bandwidth. I can't imagine in Q1 of 2020 running 24 frac fleets, people here were working hard. I mean, they were up to somewhere up here probably on a day-to-day basis, dug in, doing what they do every day. To layer a transaction of this scale on top of what was already a pretty full workload, yeah, that would have been an awful lot to ask. Even as it was, you know, the commitment of the Liberty team and the OneStim folks who are working on the other side to get this across the finish line, nothing short of outstanding. But I have to think we were benefited at least a little by that reduction in activity. It provided a little bit more time in people's days that I think allowed them to put some focus on the success of this transaction. And, you know, we got across the finish line before things were really starting to get going again. And I think that allowed us a little time to get our feet underneath us, to get the process and procedure in place from a supply chain standpoint. Of course, our organizations were both great at what they did, but we did things differently. You know, as much as you'd like to think that things will seamlessly bolt together, nothing could be further from the truth. We do supply chain differently. We even rig in that treating iron backwards to one another. I mean, all of those fundamental things were just different. And so you have to have some time and some patience to figure out a plan forward in all of those ways. In some cases, it's going to be two different paths forward for a while. But I think we had the latitude and the freedom and probably the benefit of a little bit of time to be able to think about those things, rather than you know, the alternative scenario, which is that this happened at the peak of a market, not the time we would typically do a transaction, but that's a very different ask of the people involved at that point in time. And so I do think that was tremendously helpful to us. And as you think about things that, gosh, you can always do a little bit better, you know, I think we went into this first and foremost trying to make sure our egos didn't get in the way. It's always easy to believe that you do things the best possible way, that you've got it all figured out, and that that's the way it should be done going forward. But of course, that's not the path to success in any transaction like this. When you bring together two great organizations that have a long, proud history of you know, of innovating in the space and continuing to get better and deliver a level of excellence to their customers, you have to go into that believing that there are great things that come out of both of those stories, and that we need to find the best of those and be open to bringing those things together and ultimately finding a path forward that incorporates that. And I think often in transactions that is not the case. I've been on the receiving end of a few in my life, on the been purchased end of things, and I don't know that that's always been true. I've certainly been in scenarios where a very large company acquired a small company I was a part of and believed that they had the world all figured out. And it was very, very clear, at least from the outside coming into me, that was not the case, that there was plenty of opportunity for improvement there. But there has to be a willingness to listen and ultimately to adopt those things. And so I think for us, we worked very, very hard to do two things. First of all, to remember who it is that we are and where it was that we came from and what got us here. So the fundamentals that are the basis for who Liberty is, to never forget those things, because becoming a bigger company puts that at risk. But then to remember that we haven't got the world all figured out, that we have continued to find ways to get better over the 10 years that we have been around as an organization, and that we should have no reason to believe there wouldn't be some very, very good things coming out of the OneStim side. And of course, that's absolutely been true. There's There have been a lot of great things come out of there that together have made us a better organization.
Well, I love your comment on ego. And when we were at the DPC panel, the third speaker was Breezy Carlson, and we actually talk a lot about ego, and that ego seems to be the root cause of a lot of mistakes. And sometimes we don't listen to others. Sometimes we think our way is the best. So with that in mind, did you guys change the rig up of the Schlumberger versus Liberty? And since you were doing it backwards, are the Schlumberger guys still doing it their way, or did you move to a standard? How did that one go?
So for the most part, we have tried hard to leave a lot of things alone. To the extent we could, operations have carried on the way people were familiar with them, you know, not wanting to upset the apple cart. The great thing in that particular scenario is that we are evolving to a solution where that actually doesn't matter. You know, we will not have another hammer union on location, I hope, sometime down the road from now. And so it won't matter if you were a wing to the wellhead or a wing to the pump kind of company. You know, as we move to a high pressure flexible hose and monoline and some sort of monoline manifold system to the wellheads, we're getting rid of all that stuff. And so both companies will be better for getting rid of small diameter treating iron and swinging a sledgehammer every day. And we can put that one to bed without having to settle which one was the better way.
That's the best way. So I love that you talk about technology, and one of the innovations coming out of the frac world, obviously part of it's emissions, but we talk about the electric frac crews and the ability to either generate electricity on site using natural gas turbines or what have you, and that innovation. And then you talked about this mono high strength pipe, which again, the materials have improved so much since I started my career 20 years ago and you maybe like 21 years ago. What other innovations are you seeing in frac that's making it safer, better, faster, that operators are benefiting from? And then what's the flip side in terms of the preventative maintenance and some of the issues, given that you're able to run your equipment so much longer with faster rig ups?
Yeah. So you hit on a couple of the key areas. You know, if you think about maintenance that we have to deal with, any place that we pump sand and water, that stuff wears out fast. Sand is very, very good at erosion, and so it's hard on equipment. And so there, of course, a huge amount of focus on the pumps themselves and on the treating line that carries that. There's a fair bit of cool innovation going on around the wellhead itself, which we have found quite fascinating and ultimately quite beneficial. You know, you go back to this whole idea of collecting data, and we have, since the day we started, measured every minute of every day on every location we've ever fracked on. So we have an enormous database that talks about how we spend our time, how much of it is spent pumping, how much of it we spend fixing pumps and waiting on wireline or waiting on water or whatever the case might be. And as the business has continued to evolve, you know, we've had to find a way to be successful in a different margin environment than we had historically. 2011, the year Liberty started, rolling into 2012, those are probably the strongest frac margins that have ever existed in the 10 years we've been in business. They went downhill, I think, every year into the 15, 16 downturn. We got a brief reprieve there, and then 20 kicked us again. But, you know, as the industry has been focused on driving efficiencies and whatnot, it's become a very important part of our world, trying to understand that. And so, of course, there's been a lot of work going on in the frac world, but the wellhead opportunity is a great one. We have this ongoing dance back and forth between wireline and frac. We've got valves that have to be maintained there. Of course, that is the barrier that keeps everything in check when we need it. And so that's an important part of our world. And it was a part of the world that always took some amount of time to go back and forth between frac and wireline, bleed down the pressure, get changed over, pressure test again, whatever the case might be. But there's been some great innovation there that effectively allows an instantaneous well swap. I'll probably get the analogy wrong, but I would liken it to an airlock on a, you know, getting from one environment to a different pressure environment. But they effectively allow us to get on and off the well without ever bleeding off the pressure. And so that means we can effectively stop pumping on well A and start pumping on well B immediately with no gap in there. And so you have these great people in our industry that are finding innovative ways to put new technology out there that ultimately buy for us more minutes in a day. That comes with the challenge that you highlighted. Of course, the more minutes we find to pump in a day, the better we have to do from a maintenance standpoint. We got to keep pumps up and running, and enough pumps up and running to meet the rate and pressure requirement that is happening out there on location. But the pumps need maintenance. Stuff still wears out. And, you know, it used to be in my early days, we only had to pump one frac job a day. You had the whole night to do maintenance on the fleet if you needed to. Today, that has to be squeezed in between stages. And as that time disappears, as we continue to find ways to pump more and more hours of the day, we have to get more and more innovative about the equipment design and how we maintain those assets.
Was it beneficial then? And we'll talk about the fact that you're running north of 30 frac crews now. That's been a big change. We've seen, I talk about ducks all the time, and we've seen a material decrease in ducks over the last year. We're down about 1,000. No doubt operators are highly incented right now to bring on ducks. Even ducks they thought might not be economic at 45 are starting to look pretty good at 72. And if you can get payout, then there's a different math equation. How advantageous is it that there may be an underutilization in terms of current frac rigs, frac units, horsepower, and the fact that industry has been displaying a surprising amount of capital discipline to date? Is that helping at all with PM? Like, are you able to bring out more pumps than you otherwise would? And is that going to be something go forward, or do you really see the ramp is gonna really get us back to, at least in the short term, the same number of completion crews that we had running going into coronavirus?
Yeah, I don't think we go back there. I mean, we were 350, maybe even 400 frac crews running. I think there were even numbers saying north of that. I don't see a world where we go back to that place again. I think we have benefited over this last little while by virtue of having all of that equipment available to us. All those extra pumps mean that you can take more horsepower out to location. You can take a level of redundancy to a location you probably wouldn't have contemplated a couple of years ago. And so that has certainly helped, particularly coming out of a very challenging time when maintenance spend was probably at a low for many folks. To get through this ramp up and to manage what are tough frac jobs now. The ask on the equipment is difficult, but I think what ultimately erodes that is this migration to next generation assets. We are going to get to a place where a tier 2 diesel asset just does not have a huge amount of demand today. In fact, I think we already see that bifurcation. I think you have one demand profile for next generation assets, specifically tier 4 dual fuel and electric, and then you have a different demand profile for a tier 2 diesel only asset, and maybe tier 2 dual fuel fits somewhere in the middle. But the demand profile for tier 2 diesel only, I suspect, is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller relative to the available capacity there. And on the flip side, as we continue to push towards having less and less impact and deploying better and better technology, the demand profile for the next generation assets, electric and tier 4 DGB, probably outstrips the supply there and continues to for some period of time. I think that's what ultimately right sizes the market, or at least helps to right size the pressure pumping market, and gets us back to a scenario where the available fleet is about right sized for the amount of demand that's out there. And I don't know exactly where that number lands, but it's probably somewhere between 220 and 250 frac fleets at some point in time down the road. But I think that's how that situation probably plays out. My crystal ball is wrong as many times as it is right, but that's my best guess for today.
Well, and the dual fuel, just for clarity, would be natural gas and diesel. And so would you see some of these tier 2 engines perhaps being like the redundant backup as demand for them falls, but they're sort of the emergency, grid goes down, bad things happen, you have an extra pump or two, and that's how some of these older units are absorbed into the market, that adds convenience and reliability to customers? Is that a fair projection?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. They will be there to provide that extra level of support as long as people are willing to maintain them. And at some point in time, it'll just not be worth it to do that anymore, and they will go by the wayside.
So you answered the question, which I appreciate, in terms of oil's 75. The world is great, but we're not seeing a return to the same activity level as we saw before. And you're seeing a really interesting dynamic that no doubt that you're seeing a lot as well, is the private equity companies that have purchased land and now they've moved to this drill your returns model, are really ramping up as prices have come up and getting really aggressive. And public companies are kind of holding it in. And the model now, as you saw with Double Point, as you saw with Felix, as you're going to see with Colgate, with Franklin Mountain, with some of these other guys, they're going to build this huge cash flow profile and get taken on by the publics in that consolidation. How is it different working with the private equity folks historically and now versus the big public companies and you know, a little bit more short term, less inventory. Well, what have you found in that dynamic?
Oh, I think you highlighted it well. We're now in a position where you know, in the past we had I think we would have had investors say, if you weren't at least 3 times levered as a public company, you weren't using your balance sheet well enough. And now, if you're more than 1 time levered, what are you thinking? So there's been a pretty dramatic change in thinking there. That is, to your point, changed the behavior of the publics and in the right direction. You know, we've been a challenged industry for a little while, and we are in a different place now, and that's a good thing. You know, I think we at Liberty have always believed we had to be responsible stewards of capital, and we have a return on invested capital that shows that, and that's important. You invest in a business, and you've got to take that cash flow invested in opportunities with a meaningful return and find a way to generate growth in that. And so that's always been our belief around how a business should be run, and I think our history shows that, and we've seen a migration there for our space in general for the public companies, and that's a good thing. That's how we should be thinking about business, and that is holding true all the way through this year, despite pretty dramatic changes in oil prices. Be interesting to see what budgets do headed into next year, but my guess is the response will be a responsible one and a well thought out and measured one. The privates, to your point, are responding to price signals, and you know, selfishly from a service company standpoint, I have to say a little bit, thank goodness, because that has certainly been helpful to move our space towards not balanced by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly a better place. You know, with I don't know if the percentage is exactly right, but I think they're about 40% of the activity now privates are versus public. So that's meaningful, and their response to price signals has the ability to move demand in the market. And so that's to some extent a good thing, as long as we, and I mean the broader we as an industry, don't get out over the tips of our skis again and put ourselves back in a tough spot. So I don't know that happens. I'm not sure we're headed in that direction, but it's something we have to be cognizant of.
So two more questions for you. The first is around the data, and I think, as you know, I talk a lot about consolidation, and I think about company A, big company, company B, big company. They have huge data, and as you talked about for Liberty, you have hundreds of thousands of wells and terabytes, petabytes, all the bytes of data, and then you integrate Schlumberger. How challenging was the systems back office integration when no one was at work or coming from different organizations and different systems? And were there any advice or tips that you would pass on to others who are going to go through this in terms of the data migration and management of such a huge behemoth?
It was huge, and that should be no surprise, I guess. We're Oracle, they're SAP. I mean, there was just no good luck there in terms of easy synergies, and this one maybe even made a little bit more complicated by virtue of the fact that we didn't buy the whole company. We bought OneStim, which is a small piece of a very, very large global service organization. And as much as OneStim stood a little bit by itself, all of that back office, all of that data and stuff lived inside of a much, much larger organization. And so to wrap our arms around that data and get that carved out and separated and fed into the Liberty world was a huge undertaking. And it was no small effort on behalf of the teams on both sides of this thing to make that happen. And some of it is still going on. You get all the critical stuff done, you identify the priorities, you got to get that done in. So finance, supply chain, all of those things got to happen quickly. And then there's other stuff that can take a little longer, information around how to build this piece of equipment or some CAD drawings and things like that. That stuff can take a little longer. But it was a big undertaking. And I was fortunate enough to not have to be in the middle of that. There was a lot of great people here who I'm sure were up many, many hours of the night, many, many sleepless nights, probably trying to make that happen. And I suspect they could give you a lot better advice than I could about what they might do differently the next time. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have communication, right? You have to have open lines of communication between the two organizations, especially in this case where a lot of that organization remained intact. They were not coming to join the Liberty family, right? That whole back office world accounting and finance and IT and stuff, that stayed at Schlumberger. And that's good in some respect, in that they were going to be there and in those roles going forward. And so but they also have a business to run, independent of getting all this data moved over to Liberty. And so you have to have a lot of great communication back and forth together to make sure that we're managing that well, that they are still able to do what they need to do to support the Schlumberger organization going forward, but also make sure that the Go Forward Liberty platform got everything that they were needing to be successful. And I know the folks that oversaw the transaction, both on our side and on the Schlumberger side, worked incredibly hard at that. I think you'd hear from the people here, they couldn't have been happier when all the meetings finally came to an end. But that you just can't do it without that communication. And unfortunately, meetings seem to be a necessary evil in making that happen.
And fair to say, given the dynamic that Oracle won, the Oracle versus SAP, yeah.
Yes, it did.
Which again, from a strategy standpoint, makes perfect sense, because the integration, it's not about ego. Sometimes it's about when the whole organization knows a tool, you gotta go with the horse that brought you. Yep. Last question. I usually ask, what advice would you give yourself? But given your platform and your passion for energy poverty, talk to people about how they need to view what we're going to see this summer, which you and I both know is going to be rolling blackouts, brownouts, and greenouts in California, in Texas, in New York. What message would you tell people, and maybe tie it all together with the North Face, which the best line from that whole video had to be, not only are they a great customer of oil and gas, but they're a great partner. So you're welcome. I mean, it was just, I just had to love it. And I love that Chris used and Liberty used your platform to get that very important message out. And I hope the other major CEOs of large oil and gas companies stop hiding and start talking, because we need more dialogue. But I will turn it to you for the last. Energy poverty, what would you say to people?
I think what I would say to people is that we have a very simple ask out of this, to recognize that 5 billion people, 6 billion people don't live the way we do today. That we're having a conversation that I think is set in a context around how 1 billion people live on this earth, and that's really unfortunate. The conversation, unfortunately, has become very one-sided and leaves out a huge amount of the facts. And so all our ask is that the conversation that happens, is allowed to happen freely, but is a conversation that includes all of the context that needs to be contemplated when we think about energy, that there are pros and cons to every decision we make in life, and that ultimately making the decisions that we have led us to a great place for humanity, and a place that I think continues to get better. But we can't turn our back on that. We can't ignore the fact that the world consumes 100 million barrels of oil a day today, and that number likely continues to climb for some period of time, and that the world we live in, at least here in our space, is only made possible by access to low-cost, reliable energy that has a storage mechanism attached to it. And without that, we're going back to a world of living in straw huts and with a little farm outside that we manage with a shovel and a pick or something like that. But that conversation's not happening, of course. The conversation that is happening does not contemplate all that is enabled this, our society today, and that's unfortunate to me. And so the reason for the North Face video, the reason for the ESG report that we published, the reason that I spend time on LinkedIn, you spend time on LinkedIn, that Chris is doing whatever he can in the public realm, that Steve Koonin is writing the book that wrote Unsettled, is to make sure that the conversation is a fair and balanced one that ultimately has us arrive in the best possible place for humanity going forward. And I just don't think that's true today. And so I don't have to be a part of that conversation. If you don't want me there because I'm in oil and gas, that's fine. But don't not have the conversation, and that's what's happening today. We got to fix that.
It is amazing that we trust the sources in pharma for telling us what's good for us, and we trust the sources in big social media in what's good for us. And we do forget that with 90% of the world's data in 2 years having yet to be created today, All of that needs to be stored in data farms that are reliable, because you expect to be able to download your pictures from the cloud whenever and wherever you want them. So Ron Gusek, I really appreciate you joining. I've always had a huge amount of respect. I love your presence. I love the platform that Liberty has and everything Liberty's done. My commendation to both you, Chris, the board, the team, and everyone at Liberty. Congratulations, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, David. Enjoyed the conversation and appreciate what you do each and every day too. We got to be out there poking people's buttons a little bit.
Well, you'll appreciate that I've been growing this beard back, because when you said that May 2020 was the worst time, I'm going to film a video of me talking to myself from today, 15 months ago, and tell me all the things that have happened, and watch for that on LinkedIn. It's coming. Until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now. Thanks for joining us.